Is there a self or there is no self? Who's right? Obviously, they're both right. And you could even say they're both wrong because it seems contradictory because just because it's words and thoughts, both lines of teaching are right. They are trying to they're trying to point to a direct experience. Mainly Buddhism, which are most known by pointing to there is no self and realizing that actually there is no entity separated from the rest of the world that is doing anything at all. It's saying exactly the same as other teachings based mostly on Advaita Vedanta, where you have a sense of you don't know who you really are, and you have to discover a deeper sense of yourself that is transcendent. Both of them are saying the same thing. If you bring it to practice, the point is that we don't really know what or who we are. So, obviously, Buddhism is not saying that you don't exist. You don't exist in the regular sense. It's a way of playing around with it. And it's very useful, it's very practical. Because, for example, a typical thing you would do in Buddhism is that you observe every detail of this experience. There's no speculation, not philosophical uh, jargon or whatever. It's just about this moment here and now, and it's pointing directly. If you observe your thoughts, at some point you realize that there is actually not an entity that you would call a thinker. It's just thoughts happening spontaneously. Like my hand was moving without me thinking about it. Everything is just spontaneously happening. Even our body and our mind are expressing itself without much control, which is a very shocking experience to realize. So there's a reason why this point is so strongly emphasized all through Buddhism. And it's a direct experience. It's a very practical way of seeing the whole thing. Like what you think you are not. We are the basic problem of suffering is that we're taking for granted that we are a body and a mind, and we have that kind of problems. But when you observe your direct experience without going on to believing or looking for something different, not just trying to go to the truth of this moment, you find that actually, if you break down moment to moment every single inner experience mostly, you discover that there is no a thing you find that you say, oh, this is me. My thoughts are there, and there's a me that is here that is observing the thoughts. On the other side, you have Advaita Vedanta kind of teachings where they are all the time emphasizing that, for example, a typical approach is neti neti, which is basically you go and denying everything. Oh, I see my body, I'm not my body. I see my thoughts, I'm not my thoughts. I see that person that comes and goes, this is not me. Me is something that is observing that. And it's also true, obviously. Both going for the path of no self is a negative path, and going on affirming a true self beyond your regular sense of self is a positive path. Both has their pros and cons. The pros of a negative path it is that very straight, practical, to the point. There is no confusion. That's why I believe that the Buddha took that path because it's the easiest way to explain someone. Don't make any assumption. Don't try to look for any God, for any spiritual anything. Just look for the truth here right now and don't make any assumption. So in that sense, you retract yourself back. And of course, in more advanced teachings, they say they don't call it true self, but they have wording for it. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, they call it Rigpa, which is you could translate it some way as awareness. And you see how this completely relates to more classical non-dual teachings of Hinduism, where they say you look for your true self, which is actually awareness. They are saying the same thing in the practical sense. And so the negative side could, the negative path, one of the downsides of it is that it could lead people to a complete negation of themselves. If you've been following Buddhism for a while, you may have noticed that some people are like kind of trying not to emphasize any aspect of themselves that would make them characteristic individuals. So they just try to become like communists in the sense, all the same, nothing matters, and there is no desire. There's everything is trying to annihilate any sense of individuality in some way, which is that obviously is a misunderstanding, but it's a very common misunderstanding of trying to negate the self-identity, the false sense of identity. You could call it ego. The positive side is very specific, it's very scientific, and you can completely trust it. And it's not about believing anything, it's about really just seeing. So, in that sense, it is very, very useful. On the other hand, the teachings there are positively stating that there's a true self that is you, and it's trying to deny also at first the external layers and trying to point to that. Its positive side is obviously that it's positive, so it's life affirming. Is You don't feel, oh, I don't exist. You clearly say, no, this is obvious. I am. And that gives a profound sense of peace with yourself. And there's a lot of um, gaining from affirming your existence. But the trap with this kind of teachings is that words become useless very soon. For example, if you have been around the non-duality world enough, it's like all the time. Um, just just awareness, limitless, timeless presence. Everything just start becoming pointless very soon. There's no subject, there's no object, there is no everything is kind of just breaking the language already too soon, too early. There's no way of really following that conversation very deep. So, many of these great teachings, let's take for example Ramana Maharshi, they will say, okay, just question yourself who you are. That's it. Who are you? Try to any experience, try to go to the deep sense of you. And at some point, if you do that honestly and long enough, at some point you start noticing that there is a real sense of existing beyond your body and your mind. But actually, for example, Ramana Maharshi clearly stated that the highest teaching is just silence. And that's also a very common practice in Buddhism. So I would say there's no better path, but personally, I would strongly suggest to really find the communion of both approaches in your dialectic experience. So make the most and make use of directly exploring reality with making any assumptions of a true self or any kind of entity to find somewhere. No, just be honest and find and look to what is your direct experience, what you can clearly see honestly. And on the other hand, you could also relax yourself into the trust that I would say non-dual teachings in the Advaita Vedanta are really more in line to what is normally called God or a sense of oneness. So there's a lot of feelings that we could call them love and appreciation, and they are life affirming. So in that sense, can be also very nice teachings to follow, to not get trapped in this idea that you don't exist as a pointless riddle that many people practicing Buddhism, when you read the books and when you read the scriptures, it's very easy to misunderstand that to some sort of nihilism, to some sort of depersonalization. Like you start negating yourself, which is obviously is not a natural thing to do. That's not the point of the teachings. They are both practical and they work perfectly. I would even argue that it is actually very positive to switch between them. So one side doing this Buddhism negative path where you don't assume anything. You're not looking for any subtle you that you don't know what it is. So we tend to speculate. No, you just look for your direct experience and what you can clearly perceive. For that, you need a very clear, silent peaceful, still mind. On the other hand, once you sort of tap into the simplicity that everything is already, that you are already, then suddenly these other non-dual teachings that are more affirming can also be like a glass of fresh water in the middle of the desert after trying to meditate for many hours and following these teachings, these other teachings. Sometimes just having a refreshment where you notice, wait, whatever you're looking for, it is already present. Whatever you're trying to accomplish is already accomplished. So you're not really, you don't have to desperate yourself. It's okay if you're still suffering, but just keep playing around with it. And at some point, just know that you are already perfect, that you are already safe, that everything is already okay.